I knew something was off the moment I stopped watching the skit and started watching the reactions.
I don't like where this is going.
Because if we're being honest, the joke itself, it wasn't even that extreme. It was familiar, almost boring, stuff people have whispered about for years. But then the responses started rolling in. Pastors going live, long rants, defensive tones, not reflection, not curiosity, just hit. And that's when I realized
I don't want peace. I want problems always.
this wasn't about comedy crossing the line. This was about who felt exposed by it. Because when a joke doesn't apply to you, you laugh and keep scrolling. When it does apply, you explain, you justify, you attack the messenger.
One comedian was making, these jokes about the church in America. All right, funny guy. He even mentioned in passing, you know what he said? We will take the money and send it to our congregants in Zimbabwe as the struggling ones.
When these fat people run out of jokes,
I beg your pardon. I beg your pardon.
when these fat people run out of jokes, they just go to the church. Like, bro, like, you can think, don't the church one is funny anyway, so it's not funny, it's fat. Not having it. At the end of the day, we all came out of a church system. Some of your known actors and actresses, they were raised with those offerings there. So it is within our own right, my right as a leader, as a pastor, to correct the church, not a joke. But churches give to their community more than rappers do. The most stingy pastor is still a better giver than the greatest rapper.
Huh?
Because he's giving out of what he doesn't have. You know what you've been doing. You know how much you sacrifice for your community. You know what you do. You know how many people you've housed. The fact that we don't know that about other pastors does not mean it doesn't exist, because I know it exists. So it is not a joke. It's not going to be funny, and we're going to attack when we're ready.
Okay.
No, I'm not finding anything a comedian is doing to the church funny. Don't send it to me. Don't be mad. I'm not on that. We're not laughing at what's not funny. That's not fun. The church is under attack. And you know how much I don't like.
So the real story here isn't the skit. It's the pattern behind the reactions. Why certain people got loud, why others stayed quiet, and why this moment touched something way deeper than humor. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. The exact moment this stopped being comedy was not the punchline. It was the silence right after. That awkward pause where people didn't know whether to laugh or feel seen. Because let's be real, satire only feels offensive when it lands close to home. If it doesn't apply to you, you chuckle and scroll. If it does apply, you start explaining why it's out of line. I noticed something real quick. Nobody was calmly saying, that's inaccurate. Nobody was breaking down facts. Instead, it was emotion first, defense first, authority first. And that tells me the skit didn't mock belief, it mocked position. It mocked the untouchable role. Because faith can survive jokes, authority hates them, especially when the joke sounds familiar. The outfits, the language, the money talk dressed up as blessings. None of that felt exaggerated. It felt observed. And that's why the energy shifted so fast. This wasn't ha-ha funny. This was, wait, why does that look like us?
Why?
The moment people stop laughing and start lecturing a comedian, that's when you know something landed exactly where it wasn't supposed to. Here's something people don't like admitting. Institutions can survive criticism all day. They can survive think pieces, exposés, even lawsuits. What they cannot survive is being laughed at, because criticism still treats you as serious. Laughter removes fear. And once fear is gone, the spell starts breaking. That's why scandals get managed, but jokes get attacked. I noticed how fast the tone changed once the skit went viral. Suddenly it wasn't, that's inaccurate. It was, this is disrespectful. That's a power move, not a moral one. Disrespect is only a problem when reverence is required. And some systems only function when people stay reverent, quiet, and grateful. Comedy flips that. It puts the audience above the figure instead of beneath them. And for some leaders, that's unbearable. That's why the response wasn't playful. It was urgent, almost panicked. Because once people laugh together, they start asking questions together. And questions are expensive. Watch the responses carefully and you'll catch it. The language shifted real fast. It wasn't, we should reflect. It wasn't, let's address this. It was, the church is under attack.
Come on, none of it's true. None of it's true. It's BS. They made it up. They lie.
That phrase is a shield, not a truth. Because the skit didn't attack churches. It didn't name denominations. It didn't call out God. It portrayed behavior. And when behavior gets exposed, the safest move is to turn it into persecution. Now anyone asking questions looks like an enemy. That's not theology. That's crisis management.
Yeah, I told you he was going to address it. Look.
Video that came out this past week with a few 100 million views. And some people were trying to link it to me.
You don't find that suspicious? You don't find that suspicious? You don't find that suspicious?
And so I watched the video. It was hilarious. It was funny. It was all this stuff. And how you feeling, Pastor Mike? I don't even know really what happened. Because I've been off of social media. I had a few people tell me what was going on. I was like, that's crazy. I don't even got a Rolls Royce. What? I didn't know.
That you could
like people AIing pictures and doing stuff. I said, I don't remember being that big. I was big, but I don't remember being that big. But it wasn't even directly pointed at me. But it distracted them from what God told them to do.
I noticed how the most emotional responses weren't even about faith. They were about respect, about who gets to speak, about knowing your place. That's when it clicked for me. This wasn't about spirituality at all. It was about protecting a structure that doesn't like mirrors. Because if it were really about God, the response would have been humility, correction, accountability. Instead, we got outrage. And outrage is usually the sound of leverage slipping. This is the oldest move in the book. The second uncomfortable behavior gets pointed out, the conversation shifts. Not, is this happening? Not, how do we fix it? But why are you attacking the church? That phrase sounds spiritual, but it functions politically. Because now the issue isn't conduct, it's loyalty. If you question the behavior, you're suddenly questioning God. If you laugh at the skit, you're disrespecting the faith.
I mean, it's all right. Like, overrated as in my opinion. I mean, and you know what though? That's typically how the bullshit goes. You feel me?
That framing traps people emotionally. I've seen this pattern everywhere, not just in churches. Corporations do it. Governments do it. Any system that doesn't want scrutiny pulls the same move. It turns accountability into betrayal. And once that happens, facts don't matter anymore. Only sides do. That's why some reactions sounded less like sermons and more like warnings, as if someone crossed a boundary they weren't supposed to see. And when people feel the need to guard a boundary this aggressively, it's usually because something valuable sits behind it. Here's where the situation flipped. The moment pastors jumped online to respond, the power dynamic changed. Now it wasn't a comedian punching up. It was authority figures punching down, publicly. And once that happens, the audience starts watching differently. Not for truth tells. Who stayed calm? Who reflected? Who admitted there's a problem? And who immediately went hostile, defensive, mocking the question instead of answering it. That contrast told the real story. Because if the skit truly didn't apply to you, you wouldn't feel the need to respond at all. I noticed something else too. The pastors who had nothing to hide spoke softly. The ones who felt exposed spoke loudly. That's not coincidence. That's human behavior. And once the audience noticed that pattern, the skit stopped being the headline. The reactions became the content. This is where people really started telling on themselves. Because reactions don't lie, especially emotional ones. Some people said, yeah, this is uncomfortable, but we need to talk about it. Others said, This is evil. This is disrespect. This must stop. Those are two very different instincts. One leans toward truth. The other leans toward control. I wasn't paying attention to what they said anymore. I was watching how they said it. The defensiveness, the urgency, the need to shut it down quickly. That's the sound of familiarity, not offense. Because if something is truly foreign to you, it doesn't make you angry, it confuses you. Anger shows up when recognition does. And once you realize that, you start seeing the reactions not as righteous outrage, but as unconscious confessions. Here's the part nobody wants to say out loud. Comedy scares power more than criticism ever does. Criticism can be debated. Comedy gets felt. You can argue theology. You can argue scripture. But when people laugh, that's a crack in authority. Because laughter bypasses permission. It doesn't ask leaders if it's allowed. It spreads horizontally, peer to peer. That's why satire has always been targeted first. Kings feared jesters. Dictators banned comedians. Institutions label jokes as dangerous, not because they're false, but because they're efficient. Druski didn't present an argument, he presented a mirror. And mirrors are offensive only to people who don't like what's reflected. Let's be real for a second. This whole thing circles back to one thing: money. Not generosity, not faith, not blessings. Money. And who gets to control the story around it? Notice how fast the conversation jumps from "are people being exploited" to "don't question God's anointed." That's not accidental. Because the moment you separate faith from finances, a lot of explanations stop working. Why are donors struggling while leaders flex? Why does questioning spending feel like heresy? Why does transparency feel optional? Those questions aren't attacks on belief. They're threats to revenue models. And once people start asking those questions publicly, you can't unring that bell. That's why reactions came fast and loud. This isn't really about Druski. He just hit the pressure point. What's being exposed is a bigger tension between spiritual authority and accountability. Modern audiences aren't anti-faith. They're anti-being played. People still want meaning. They still want community. They still want belief. They just don't want intimidation wrapped in scripture or luxury justified as holiness. And when institutions refuse to adapt, they don't collapse overnight. They get memed. They get questioned. They get slowly desacralized. That's the real danger here, not disrespect relevance loss. Because once people stop taking something seriously, no amount of outrage brings that power back. Let me say this carefully. People aren't rejecting faith, they're rejecting performance. That's the disconnect pastors keep missing. Nobody's mad at God. They're mad at the business model pretending to be God. Because modern faith culture has slowly drifted from service to spectacle. Lights, stages, luxury branding, VIP access to anointed leaders. And the moment you turn belief into a product, you invite consumer logic. Consumers ask questions. They want receipts. They want to know where the money went. But churches still want unquestioned authority in a world that no longer runs on it. That tension, that's what Druski touched. Not doctrine, not scripture, power dynamics. Here's what gave it away for me. The ones yelling the loudest weren't offended believers. They were personally implicated leaders. If the skit didn't apply to you, why are you sweating? You didn't see humble pastors calmly saying, "Yeah, there's some truth here, we should reflect." Nah, you saw rage, defensiveness, victim language. The church is under attack. They're mocking God. They're trying to destroy us. That's not faith talking. That's status protection. Because if you've built your identity on authority, any joke that lowers you to human level feels like violence. Druski didn't accuse them by name. They volunteered themselves. This is the part nobody wants to admit. The fear isn't disrespect. The fear is loss of control. Because once people realize they're allowed to laugh, they're also allowed to question. And once questioning becomes normal, obedience stops being automatic. That's the real threat. Not memes, not comedians, not TikTok. It's people realizing faith doesn't require fear. and generosity doesn't require pressure. And when that realization spreads, institutions either evolve or they start shouting louder to cover the cracks. This whole Druski situation isn't really about comedy. It's about what happens when power loses its invisibility. For a long time, certain institutions survived because they weren't questioned out loud. Not because everyone agreed, but because people were taught silence was respect. And the moment humor entered the room, that spell broke. That's how power always cracks. Not with riots first, but with laughter. Culture has shifted. People still want meaning, spirituality, community, but they don't want intimidation disguised as holiness. They don't want pressure dressed up as faith. And they definitely don't want accountability framed as persecution.
We don't do that here.
When leaders react emotionally instead of transparently, they reveal something deeper than offense. They reveal fear. Human behavior is simple when you strip it down. Those who serve don't panic when questioned. Those who benefit from confusion do. That's the pattern repeating here. Not just in churches, but in politics, media, corporations, everywhere. Any system that demands trust without scrutiny eventually starts fighting jokes harder than facts. And once people see that, you can't put it back in the box. So here's the real question. If a joke makes you feel attacked, is it really the joke or what it exposed? If you want to go deeper into how power reacts when it starts slipping, watch the next video right here. I'll see you on the next one.
Panda
Panda out.